Hello, and welcome to our breakout session on global action on bipolar. So at the start, I referenced some research done by Oxford University that estimated that there was 46 million people living with bipolar across the world. If you include friends and family in that, there's probably over 80 million people who are directly affected by it, perhaps up to 100 million. That's a huge number of people. And we know that bipolar doesn't discriminate on ethnicity or background. And we know that people live in very different circumstances all across the world. So there's things that we can do in the UK to be able to help people live well with bipolar, but we know a lot of the actions that we'll want to see happen will probably have to be done potentially at a global level, certainly around research, but also maybe even around expanding the use of peer support as well. So we've got an amazing group of amazing panelists here. So we've got Professor Allan Young, who's one of the trustees of Bipolar UK, who's the director for the Centre of Affective Disorders at King's College London. Also, we just found out taught in Vancouver as well for a number of years. So that's fantastic. He's up in Edinburgh. Are you up in Edinburgh at the moment?
No, I'm in London.
You're in London. Okay, that's good. So you're not moonlighting then for King's then at the moment? No, you're down.
No, I've just come back from King's, hot foot and full of enthusiasm for our university.
Fantastic. And we've got Professor Bruno Etain from, he's a professor of psychiatry at the University of Paris, city in France. Welcome, Bruno.
Hello.
And we've got Monty Ghitter here from, who's the founder of the Bipolar Support Club International. Now, you are based in Canada, aren't you, Monty?
Yes, I am. Yeah, Calgary.
Calgary, brilliant. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We didn't create a panel of just men, so we are potentially, hopefully, going to have a fifth joining us, who's Susana from Bipolar Australia as well. So hopefully she'll be able to join. But if she doesn't, then we'll be able to have a kind of a more general chat, I think, amongst ourselves. We started a little bit late, so we'll probably go on till about 7:50 if the panelists are okay with that, and you, the audience, are as well. So I think we'll start off by talking about research. So Bruno, do you want to go first? So looking at France, we've talked a lot about the research. I know a bit about the research in the UK through Allan, and also through looking at some of the English language studies that come over from the States. Can you tell me what the state of play is in France at the moment? Because France is one of the other leading countries in terms of bipolar research, isn't it?
Well, we hope so, but we are not the only one who are contributing to the bipolar research in the world. But I think that one main opportunity in France to set up a good quality clinical research is to have establish a network of centers of expertise in bipolar disorder in France. So we have set up this kind of network more or less 10 years ago, and it gathered between now, I think we are 15 different centers, all using the same kind of clinical, physical, cognitive assessment for patients with bipolar disorders. And this is an opportunity because since we are joining all these forces together to clinically assess the patient, to follow them up longitudinally, this now offers quite a large amount of data in France to try to explore the main question we have in bipolar disorder, which is, can we predict the outcomes in bipolar disorders? And now we have something like 5,000 people with bipolar disorder who has joined the network to be assessed and follow up. And probably this is why at the moment we have some quite new data to propose in the field, mainly in terms of prediction of outcomes.
Thanks, Bruno. I mean, that kind of prediction is such an important thing, isn't it? And certainly there's potential there with mood apps, we understand. And that national network sounds like a really good model. We've got that for early intervention services in the UK for psychosis. And one of the things that we'll be looking through at the next phase of the commission is more detailed recommendations. And that type of model could be something that we could try to see implemented in the UK. So, Allan, how does that compare to within the UK? And actually, before we do that, I was going to, while you're collecting your thoughts there, Allan, I'm going to put a quick poll out to people so they can do another vote over the next, while you listen to the speakers. We just want to understand, those of you international audience here, lots of people from across the world, a lot of people dialing in from Canada. I see Monty. Do you think Bipolar UK services are accessible to an international audience? It'd be good to know that. And we'll just, we'll put those findings out at the end of this session. So it's another little vote there, a bit of interaction. Allan, now you've collected your thoughts. Could that model work in the UK?
Well, yes, it could. I mean, the first thing to say is that bipolar research is very international. So we have international societies like International Society of Affective Disorders, which I was president of, and the International Society of Bipolar Disorders. And we're very keen on, in both societies, in involving patient and service user groups. And we're very keen on learning about research and experience from different countries. And I think we've made real strides over the past few years with bigger science. I mean, the first thing to say is that there's a general trend in science, and especially in clinical science, to go big, because one center is unlikely to solve a problem on its own because of the problem of needing lots of numbers. And I think this was the inspiration behind the network in France, which I think is an excellent model. I'm great admiration of my French colleagues. So working with Bruno and with his colleague Franck Bellivier, we helped set up the R-Link consortium. Now, this is funded by the European Union. And contrary to what some people thought about the EU, we got a lot out of the EU, and we got R-Link, which is a fantastic project. And this is a project that was funded to look at the predictors of response to lithium. And it's been run across 15 centers in Europe, one of which is mine and one of which is Bruno and Franck's. And it has centers in Scandinavia, Germany, France, Spain, Italy, and so on and so forth. And this is trying to look at the predictors of response, as Bruno said, and if we can identify, before we give lithium, who will be a good and a poor responder. And this, by its very nature, is sort of big science. And this is the way for the future. We know it's the way for the future for disorders like bipolar disorder because it's been so successful in other areas of medicine, things like cancer and in immunology and so on and so forth, where it's no longer a sort of blunderbuss or shotgun approach to treatment where it's done on an empirical try it and see if it fails basis, but they can target the treatment much more specifically. So R-Link, which is about lithium, I urge people to have a look at that because we're still recruiting in France and Britain. The other thing to say is that with R-Link, we've entered into something called the Global Bipolar Cohort Studies with colleagues in the United States, which, as Monty knows, is a country to the south of Canada, and also Canada, and colleagues in Asia and Australasia. And what we're trying to do here is take all of the combined data that we have and put it together. And this has worked very well, for example, in genetics and neuroimaging and so on. And we're trying to catch up to the pace with bipolar disorder clinical studies. But you asked me specifically about what I thought about the UK. And I think the UK in some ways is behind other countries. And you might be surprised to hear me say that. But I think the organization in France is better. I think certainly we do a lot of work with German colleagues and their organization, their funding and their provision of services for bipolar disorder are probably of a higher general quality. And I know from working in Canada, where I worked for 6 years, that the Canadians are very good at it as well. So I think the UK NHS has a bit to catch up with. It tends to neglect bipolar disorder. I think the one great area of hope in the UK is actually Bipolar UK. Now, bear in mind, I've got a conflict of interest. I'm a trustee. I've been a trustee for a long time. But I think the input and output of Bipolar UK, the service support and the attempts to change policy, the Bipolar Commission, are all just outstanding work and very similar to what I saw in Canada when I worked with the mood disorders associations over there. So in general, I think it's a bit of a mixed bag from the UK. Our international collaborations are great. Some of our work with the charities are great. We're actually doing great research, and we're doing that with colleagues. But in terms of service provision for people with bipolar disorder, I think we could actually we'd have to do a bit better to catch up with colleagues in some of the other countries.
That's great, Allan. Thank you very much for those very kind words. And I think it sounds like doing some sort of international benchmarking in comparisons would be really good. And this might well be the start of a conversation in that area. Monty, I'm going to bring you in now. We'll come back to some of the research issues that have been raised there. But you run like an international network of people with bipolar. So really love to understand, because we'll come down to the differences between the different healthcare systems and how they're funded and how people get support and so forth. But what have you found in terms of the commonalities between people's experience of bipolar across different countries when you're running your networks?
Well, that's a great question. There's a lot of commonalities and there's also a lot of differences. You know, mainly what we do in our club is peer support rooms. So we get people together just talking about what's going on. And I mean, some places are just different than others. You know, the victimization and the stigma in North America seems prevalent, but compared to places like Morocco and Egypt and Mongolia and Malaysia, where we also have members, it's night and day different. And so some places, excuse me, don't even talk about psychiatry in the same terms that us Western people do. And so there really is a wide variety. And yet the symptoms, a lot of the symptoms are shared experiences. So we get people talking and sharing about what they're going through and getting feedback from others. And it seems to be pretty universally beneficial. So yeah, it's sort of two answers.
That's really interesting, and it was quite heartening to see the results of the other poll about attitudes and stigma. Most people, well, not quite most people, but 43% of people said that it had actually got better. So in terms of the different models of care, because this really interests me, because in the UK we're very kind of short-sighted. It's the NHS till I die, isn't it? Quite literally. We're quite surprised that about a third of people had actually used private healthcare, which is actually really quite low. So getting access to a private psychiatrist in the UK, and I think for most people with most health conditions probably wouldn't be spending that much money. But how is a care going to France first? What's your funding model for care for bipolar? Like, is it all single funded by the state, or is it an insurance model? Is it a blended model? Like, if you're a person living with bipolar, what kind of treatment can you expect? How often can you see a psychiatrist, for example, and how is it funded?
So in France, the organization of care is very different as compared to the UK, because all the what we call the public psychiatry, which is the psychiatry at the hospital, is funded by the health insurance, and France is divided in small catchment areas. And if you are living in the catchment area, you have access to a place where you can meet a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a nurse. You have most of the time a daycare hospital, and 2 or 3 catchment area are sharing an inpatient unit in an hospital that is not so far. So if you need care for bipolar disorder or any psychiatric condition in France, by definition, the catchment area needs to provide you care. They cannot refuse to provide care. So it means that in theory, all patients will receive care in the catchment area. But you can imagine that by definition, they are totally overcrowded, and they are more orientated towards schizophrenia and psychotic disorder, and very less specialized in bipolar disorders. So most of the patients with bipolar disorder in France have a lot of complaints about the fact that, okay, the catchment area will provide care, but they will provide very low standard care. So they are moving sometimes to the private practice, which is going to a private psychiatrist who has a place for appointment in town, or to private clinic, but here the price is really expensive. So those who do not want to go to the catchment area because low standard of care, and those who cannot afford to have a private follow-up, are in the middle of nowhere. This is why we are trying to create this network to provide a place where the bipolar patient can have a public access to care, because we are hospital-based. So it means that when they are meeting me, it's at zero cost, I would say. I think that having an appointment with me is something like 27 euro, totally covered by the health insurance. So this is really cheap, I would say. And to have specialized centers who try to apply high standard quality of care, so providing personalized treatment, psychoeducation, cognitive remediation, and so on. But we do not cover all the country, in fact, because even if the center are in very big city, if you are living in a small town in the suburbs of Paris, it's quite uneasy to access to our hospital, for example. But anyway, I think that the network has probably a little bit improved the quality of care we can provide to patients. And this has been very supported by the Association of Patients, who do really a benchmark at the Ministry of Health to say, okay, we need to have specialized care for people who suffer from bipolar disorder. So this has been very helpful for setting up the network to have the support of the patient associations.
Mm-hmm. I know Bipolar France is we've ended up doing quite a lot of work with them. They're really good. Was it Bipolarité Français?
Yeah.
It's a really nice organization. And if you got bipolar, would you pay more health insurance than someone who doesn't have bipolar?
No, because if you are going to the public hospital, all your care will be paid by the health insurance. But if you go to the private practice or private clinic, for example, you will have, I don't know, maybe 20% of the cost of your stay will be covered by the national health insurance, but the extra you need to pay for that. Mm-hmm. And we have private insurance company in France that can provide you reimbursement of some private care, some care in private practice. But at the end, if you are going to the public hospital, this is more or less free. It's not free because you are paying that with your taxes and so on, but it's never free. But if you are going to a private practice, most of the time you have quite a lot to pay, which is an extra cost, because this is the private practice. And this can range from the double of the price of the hospital practice. And we have some very posh private clinic.
Oh, he's frozen.
Thanks, Bruno. It's a bit odd in the UK. We'll come to you in a minute, Allan. You do get people who end up going, paying a lot of money to go private. Thanks, Bruno. You froze there for a very short period, but that was a good summary. In the UK, we did get, through our survey findings, people did actually find private healthcare providers quite good for hospital care. And it's a bit hit and miss. You'll sometimes get people, the NHS is it's a bit weird, and we still don't quite understand it, but people will be sent to private hospitals because they run out of beds in the public ones, and the NHS will pay for it. but then a lot of people do have to pay like all of the cost of it if they choose for a voluntary admission. So it can be really hit and miss. Then Alan, you might be able to enlighten us on that a little bit.
Well, you said you still don't really understand the NHS, and I started working in it 38 years ago, and I still don't really understand it. But there's a few points worth making. One is that I think what we really need in the UK is the network of centres that you mentioned for first episode psychosis. At the moment, first episode mania gets lumped into first episode psychosis, which isn't really very helpful. So we need a delineated service, especially to deal with people at first episode mania. And this really should address two of the concerns that we hear from patients and families all the time. One is which is the need for earlier, better diagnosis, more accurate diagnosis. And the other thing is continuity of care. And we've seen this work with, with what essentially are schizophrenic type illness, but you can't really lump bipolar disorder in with schizophrenia because it's a different disorder, and people have very different needs and they're treated in different ways. I don't think private practice works for psychiatry in general in the UK, and that's because private practice in the UK tends to cherry pick. It doesn't usually offer a comprehensive service. Unlike, say, Australia, where there's government-supported private health insurance, which is supported by the government partially, but on the basis that it's comprehensive. So, I've got lots of Australian relatives, and they all have this private health insurance, and they can go to it for psychiatric disorders. It's actually very difficult to get that type of health insurance for psychiatric disorders in the UK. The NHS is the biggest purchaser of private psychiatric care in the UK, but that's because of reduced capacity for beds and so on. So if we actually spent that money better in a more planned manner, for example, on the type of bipolar network of care that you suggest related to first episode psychosis and something similar to what they have in France, we might have a better outcome altogether. So that's my 10 cents worth. I mean, I think really the NHS, which we all love, it's the national religion, is very good at responding to emergencies. When people are manic, they're not going to incur tens of thousands of pounds of bills for being hospitalized, but it's not particularly good at long-term continuity of care, and it's not particularly good at identifying bipolar disorder early, and those are two key needs.
Thanks, Alan. Monty, I've got a couple of questions for you before I come over. Very quick question, Bruno. Are the number of beds, psychiatric beds, going up or down in France?
Or
they staying the same?
It goes down because year by year by 10% or something like that. So it means that in France they would like to move to more ambulatory care, so meaning day hospital or week hospital in which people will not be full-time hospitalized. So in France we think that this is probably and to promote good quality ambulatory care, because probably when you have on a catchment area a very good ambulatory service, mobile units that are going to the home of the patient, and sometimes, most of the time, you are able to prevent long stay at the hospital because of very acute, severe episode. So I think that this is a good option that the government here has taken. But the problem is that they are decreasing the number of beds, but they are not hiring new mental health professionals to run the outpatient units. So it means that most of the services are quite in very difficult situation because they have less bed, but not more people to run the outpatient unit, the daycare hospital, the mobile unit, and so on. So it's a little bit, I would say, ambiguous as a situation, because we have to move to that, but the government doesn't seem to be willing to put a lot of money to make this shift from full-time hospitalization to daycare hospitalization or something like that.
Thank you. It sounds like there's a lot of parallels there, isn't there, with the reduced hospital beds and psychosis taking priority over bipolar and not enough trained staff, isn't there? But some clear learnings from France there that the UK could benefit from. Monty, I've got a couple of questions for you. Firstly, would you like to riff on what the healthcare is in Canada and what support people get and whether it's public and private? And then it'd be good to get your thoughts from, because you've got an amazing reach out across the world, about what would you think would be the kind of, if we can do global action on bipolar, if you're going to have the most impact, what do you think we should be doing in countries like Morocco and so forth to be able to help people live there well with bipolar?
Yeah, well, on the first question, I'm not in the best position. I'm not a professional in the field. I'm an engineer by trade. And the only real exposure I have to like where we're at with hospital care in Canada is my own personal one. So I can't talk to whether our beds are going up or down. Healthcare that we enjoy includes psychiatric services. So I get that. And we also have private healthcare. I think we're probably quite a lot like France and what Bruno said. As to what we think we can do globally, I mean, I think we're doing it. Our club has just turned into something amazing. We started it only a year ago, and we have 1,600 members worldwide now, and a lot of interest and a lot of growth. And it provides a space for people to come and get very high quality peer support, and it's free and it's highly accessible. And you do it on your phone, and it's audio only. There's no video. And it really makes people comfortable about coming and having people to talk to. And it's taking off because people are benefiting. People are passing the word and sharing the story. And yeah, we're really proud of how the club has come along. And in addition to peer support, we currently run 4 peer support rooms per week, and we're going to 6 in a couple of weeks, starting in a more favorable time zone for a start time for Europe, I should say. And we also run speaker panel sessions every week. We bring in an expert and talk about some topic or another, whether it's sleep or something else. And we have guided discussions where our researcher does a little bit of research and walks people through academic stuff. And making this widely accessible and free, for me, this is the way to go. And it's why there's so much interest.
Yeah, it's educating the community, isn't it? And then they can help educate the professionals, because there's some amazing academic clinicians out there like Bruno and Allan who are like global experts on bipolar, and sometimes us taking the knowledge to our community then taking them to the other clinicians is actually probably the quickest route. Go on, Allan.
Yeah, can I just mention, first of all, thanks to Monty, because I think that's terrific. And we did a parallel, because this week we did a World Psychiatric Association open webinar on bipolar disorder. We didn't do it today because there's so much going on, but we did it this week. We did it on Monday, and it was myself and Professor Tolan from New Mexico, and it was organized by Professor Kostas Fountanakoulis from Thessalonica. And it was really amazing that we had psychiatrists from Africa, Latin America. We had people from Bhutan and Indonesia really logging in and asking questions after our presentations. And, you know, we're used to meeting colleagues from Canada and the United States and Europe and Australia and New Zealand, but the reach, and I think potentially it would be very powerful to combine the two approaches, to combine Monty's approach with actually the healthcare professionals, because I think we really do sort of learn from each other, and we're all in this together. We're all actually sharing the same aim, which is trying to make life for people with bipolar disorder better.
Well, I already made a note about the follow up with you about the people in Canada and mood or disorder organizations. And I think there's lots we can do future collaboration wise.
Yeah, one thing that's interesting that came up in the Monday night webinar for the World Psychiatric Association was, if you're talking to someone in Bhutan, the doctor, he may only have a choice of 2 or 3 different medications, and they may be the really old cheap medications. So, you've got to be aware that every bipolar disorder seems to be pretty similar everywhere, but the healthcare provision and the background culture are different, and sometimes even the availability of the treatments that we take for granted just aren't there, which is really quite sobering.
I presume one of those treatments is probably lithium, though, isn't it? Which means that the prescribing might be a bit higher. I don't know.
Well, I mean, I think lithium, it's a great tragedy with lithium because it is the medication for bipolar. We know that there's about a third of people with bipolar 1 and a significant portion of people with bipolar 2 that do excellently well. And some people do well, but not excellently well. We know it's good for the brain. We know it potentially helps prevent dementia. We know it reduces suicide rates. But everywhere across the world, lithium is being used less and less. And people like myself and Bruno and Costas Vintonakoulis and people in the United States, Mood Disorders Unit in Vancouver and Toronto and my friends in Edmonton, everyone says we should use more lithium. But I think the way to turn lithium around is twofold. One is to get the data out to the community of people with bipolar disorder, so they start going to their doctors and saying, why haven't I been offered lithium? And the second thing is, if we can follow up with our link, and we can say, instead of saying we're just going to try it and you've got a third chance of doing really well, you've got a third chance of doing a bit better, and you've got a third chance of having no response, if people like Bruno and I can run the biomarkers, and we can say, well, in actual fact, you've got an 85% chance of doing really well, that's going to be really convincing for people. Or we can say, in actual fact, you've only got a 10% chance of doing really well. So we'll avoid these trial and error procedures that we have to do at the moment.
Yeah, I fully agree with you, Allan. But here, for example, the problem we have in France is to convince our colleagues, our psychiatrist colleagues, to put their patients on lithium. For example, I met a very young lady with very severe bipolar 1 disorder, and she came to the center because first, not so well stabilized, second, with a very massive metabolic syndrome. She has a very severe weight gain because she was on valproate plus quetiapine or something like that. And she was coming to the center to say, please tell my doctors that lithium would be an option. And I say, yeah, lithium is definitively an option for you because of your metabolic syndrome, because you have a treatment with valproate, which is in France forbidden when you are a young lady. So there are many reasons, and good reasons, for safety, for efficacy to be on lithium. But I send back to a psychiatrist in the catchment area to say, yes, here are the arguments to initiate lithium for this specific patient. And she came back 6 months after to the center to say, okay, now I'm very well. I'm on lithium. And I say, okay, so the recommendation was good. But guess what? After the first appointment we had, she has decided to have a trip to Moscow. And she had a very severe manic episode in Moscow. And in Moscow, she has been hospitalized, and they put her on lithium in Moscow. So she came back in France with lithium. And I said, but why your psychiatrists were not willing to put you on lithium? He said, okay, because you will be with a kidney insufficiency in the next 2 years, which is not true. But this is something we have to fight every day in France, where psychiatrists in catchment areas, most of the time, prefer to prescribe terrific treatment with huge metabolic consequences, but not lithium, because they have some very bad expectation about the risk for the thyroid, the risk for the kidney that exist indeed, but can be treated for the thyroid or prevented if there is a problem with the kidney. And we don't know really how we can have some help from the international society, from the patient association, to really convince our colleagues that some treatment can, some very inexpensive, quite old treatment can really improve the course of bipolar disorder. So I don't know if there is the same reluctance in UK or in Canada to prescribe such drugs, but in France this is terrible, to have patients that are really ready to try lithium, but their psychiatrists say, okay, this is really too dangerous.
Thanks, Bruno. It sounds like it is kind of common problems in the UK as well. Susana, it's lovely to have you on. How are you doing? How's it going in Australia?
It's going well. A lot of rain, and it's like now it's going to be 6 o'clock in the morning, but I've been waiting since 4 o'clock in the morning, so I've seen the whole conference, and I was getting, I'm not there, so I'm not here. I know that it's very short time left.
That's
but
fine.
I'm so happy to be here.
Give us your take, Susana, then. Give us, what's it like in Australia? Just give us a rundown.
Okay. I had some slides, but I don't know if the people behind scenes. But anyway, I just wanted to share with you something we do here in Australia very quick. This is our logo, and this was many years ago as the first support group for people with bipolar and their carers. They put together. So they just had the blue for the blues, the yellow for the mania, and the green is when we mix the colors, but when we are stable. So it's a bit like the recovery logo. Next one. But then I was, someone wrote to me, but we don't have a ribbon because we share green with many other conditions. So we thought, okay, it can still be green, but we will have our logo there. And we are all for support groups. So that little faces is all the people meeting in a support group. Next one. Now, what is this? You might think, oh my God, what is this? Our signature at Bipolar Australia is blow bubbles for bipolar, and it's supposed to have an R there. And why? It's used to break the fear of talking with someone. So you go with the people that you always wanted to talk, and say your friends, your colleagues, school, and you start blowing bubbles, but it's really to start the conversation. And the bubble is a metaphor, because when we are high and bubbly, we are like a bubble. Eventually we go down and we crash like a bubble. So that's our signature. And on the day, like yesterday, we were all blowing bubbles for bipolar. And I'll show you the last one. Can I have the last? There we are. It got as far as I was very, very impressed. This is people from every state that had a meeting at the World Bipolar Day. And they all were battling. And you can see this is a Parliament House in Canberra. So they were all in Canberra. The very first 2015, when we had the World Bipolar Day, they were all celebrating. Having said that, thank you for the slides. Thank you. Having said that, we're still very, very behind. I actually founded Bipolar Australia 7 years ago because when I was diagnosed, there were nowhere I could go, I could belong. But I've been teaching about bipolar. I'm a teacher. And I thought, okay, I'm not going to go back to early childhood, but I can use my skills to teach about bipolar. So I've been going around many different audiences, including universities, the ambulance headquarters, etc. And I noticed that they knew very, very little about bipolar. So with some people from the group that I've been facilitating now for 16 years, we said, well, maybe we should start something about telling people and start advocating for people. And that's how Bipolar Australia started, with a financial help from my family. And we launched Bipolar Australia. So I follow really at every step, more or less, from you, Simon, and it was someone else before, because I felt that that's what we need, the community-based voice, and give the path for people to have that voice and ask for what they need. Unfortunately, we're not having that loud voice, because here the investment is a lot in research, which I'm all for. I mean, I volunteer for research a lot, and as I at the moment, what they're doing is a lot of imaging, but they started in 2008, because I know I was one of the first volunteers to have an MRI. And what they want to know is to work on what we can do to diagnose bipolar much earlier than we're doing. So they're investing a lot of money in that. But unfortunately, I just heard our budget, the government budget, just 2 days ago, and community services charities like ours missed out. So we will have to work much harder to survive. We are all volunteers at the moment. I've been working voluntarily for 7 years on wearing many, many hats. I can hardly balance them. But honestly, it's a very, very uphill job. And on top of that, there are some movements here that they want to not even to say the word, because they feel that they've been labeled, something I've been, fighting against, because I just said, is the name of a bunch of symptoms. You want to call it the yellow tulips, call it the yellow tulips. But people need to know what they're talking about when they want to help you. It has to have a name, right? So we have some people that they don't want to go clinical. They just want to do all natural. So there are a lot of cases that we don't know if they're following a treatment. So we're counting. We have 568,000 people with bipolar here. We're only 25 million total. So having that amount of people is a lot of people. And we are counting, if you're well seated, from all suicides that we have here in Australia, 43.9% are people with bipolar. So my voice, I wrote to the Royal Commission that we have here in another state, but because we are national, we put the report and it didn't move a finger. It was just, so I presented yesterday with the Mental Health Australia, and she was a bit more interested. But we really, really, I shared about what we can do next, and I heard a lot of ideas, especially from you, Simon, all the list of things that we need to do to really get there. I strongly believe in support groups, and we don't get support to actually set them. Of course, the ones we have around the country, they're all run by volunteers, but they're not many. These country is enormous, around a big desert. So we all spread out, and we need many, many more support groups. And I get emails almost every day. Why don't we have a support group here? Why don't we have? And it takes a long time to get a coordinator that it will go and set and help and train people.
Susana, thank you. It's really interesting, the different, I think we'll probably have this discussion all night, actually. Unfortunately, we're kind of going on to the next slot soon. But I'd love to do, like, coordinate some RE community and see if we can get some coverage over in Australia as well, which would be really good. And I'm sure Monty would probably, his amazing group would probably do well down there as well. But certainly the battles that you're facing around even the definition of bipolar is a depressing one, isn't it? You've got a collection of symptoms, you've got a collection of solutions that don't always match up, but they match up enough to be able to say that they have some meaning. So if you're going to even talk about something as broad as mental health, then bipolar needs to be in there as a definition, doesn't it?
Absolutely. But sometimes it needs to be itemized. And that's what I just try to say to people. If you put it constantly under the umbrella of mental health, and you don't actually take bipolar as a very unique illness, we'll never get to the real core of the problem. And that's what I'm fighting against, because here everything is about mental health, but they're touching a little bit of here and there, and it's not going to happen.
Yeah. Thanks, Susana. I know it's a common challenge that we can face together. So we're going to have to end this group now. We did do a poll at the start, so if you want to flash up the results, we're talking about Bipolar UK services. 51% said they were accessible to an international audience. So maybe the community, you could do that. Maybe some of our Aussie friends and family could join that. And likewise, and I'm sure Monty, it'd be great, they said, to get what we can do to work with you to get your network out to as many people as possible. It's a real pleasure seeing you all. Thanks so much, Bruno, Allan, Monty, and Susana. We're now going to hear from one of our American cousins, Kerry Jameson. So I'll see you all in that group soon. So thanks so much for joining us, and have a wonderful evening.
I'd like to keep in touch with all of you.
Thanks. We'll speak soon. Bye.